here's something I need to talk through because it's been bothering me for days, and it's not what you probably assume. You've seen the headlines by now. Trump going after Canada again, fresh tariff threats, fresh insults. But there's a question almost no one is asking. Why is he so focused on Mark Carney in particular? Not Trudeau, not a specific policy fight, Mark Carney. And the answer to that question tells you more about Donald Trump's real fears than anything he's ever admitted publicly. Stick with me, because once you see this, it changes the entire picture. Let me start with a moment that barely registered in the news cycle. About 3 weeks ago, Mark Carney delivered a speech. It was calm, restrained, honestly kind of dull, a straightforward talk about trade policy and economic stability, the kind of address that usually fades into the background. Trump's reaction wasn't just angry. It was explosive, almost threatening. And that distinction matters. Because if there's one thing we've learned about Donald Trump over the years, it's that he doesn't lash out at random. There's always a signal, always a psychological tripwire. And without realizing it, Mark Carney stepped directly on the one trigger Trump cannot tolerate. But before I explain what that trigger is, you need to understand who Mark Carney actually is, because this is where the story gets interesting. Carney isn't a politician who wandered into economics. He's not a local figure suddenly thrust onto the global stage. This is someone who ran the Bank of Canada, then went on to run the Bank of England, and is now being openly discussed as a future Prime Minister of Canada, trained at Goldman Sachs, educated at Oxford. The kind of RA summit that, in any other situation, Trump would love to claim as his own at Mar-a-Lago. But here's what truly sets Carney apart, and this is the part you should pay attention to. Everywhere he's worked, people describe him the same way: the adult in the room, the steady presence, the person who doesn't lose his head when markets spiral. And that right there is Donald Trump's worst nightmare. Let me explain why. Trump's entire brand, his political identity, is built around one central idea: that chaos is strength, that disruption equals power, that the loudest voice automatically matters most. For decades, that approach has worked for him in real estate, on reality television, in politics. Being the center of attention has always been his advantage. Mark Carney represents the opposite philosophy, and he's succeeding with it. Think about what that does to Trump psychologically. Here's someone quieter, more reserved, intentionally unflashy, and Americans are reacting to him with something Trump hasn't seen directed at a foreign leader in years: respect, not fear, not obsession, respect. And here's what makes it even worse for Trump. Carney isn't even trying to compete with him. He's not playing Trump's game at all. He's operating by an entirely different set of rules, and those rules are working. Let me give you a clear example. When Trump threatened Canada with tariffs, Carney didn't rush to social media. He didn't hold a press conference to trade insults. He refused to engage. Instead, he quietly strengthened trade relationships with Europe, with Asia, with anyone looking for a reliable, predictable partner. And here's the part that really stings. American conservatives started applauding him for it. Imagine what that does inside Trump's head. Members of his own political base looking at a foreign leader and asking, why can't our guy act like that? That's not just a political setback. That's an identity crisis. Now, this is where things turn deeply psychological, so stay with me. Trump's power has always come from controlling the emotional energy of the room. He escalates. You respond. He escalates again. And soon everyone is operating on his wavelength. That's how he's dominated Republican politics for years. That's how he's driven media coverage. He dictates the emotional tempo, and everyone else reacts. Carney refuses to react. And that refusal is more dangerous to Trump than any insult ever could be. Because there's one thing Trump fears more than losing: irrelevance. He can explain away defeat. He's been doing that his entire life. But being ignored, being treated as if your outburst doesn't matter, that's the one thing he can't spin. And that's exactly what Carney is doing. Not ignoring Trump out of contempt, but treating him like a problem to manage rather than an enemy to battle. It's detached. It's clinical. And it's effective. Watch the pattern, because once you notice it, you can't stop seeing it. Every time Trump attacks Canada, Carney responds with some variation of, "I remain committed to our partnership with the United States." It sounds dull, almost meaningless. But look at what happens next. While Trump is still raging online, Carney is talking with European leaders, Asian trade officials, quietly assembling the kind of stable alliances that Trump's unpredictability makes impossible. In other words, Carney is turning Trump's volatility into an advantage for himself. And Trump knows it. That's why the anger feels so raw. But there's another layer here, and this is the one that really cuts deep. Mark Carney is everything Trump claims to be. Trump presents himself as the brilliant businessman, the master deal maker, the economic genius. But Carney actually is those things. He actually ran central banks. He actually helped stabilize economies during crises. He actually has the credentials Trump wishes he could point to. And he does it without the showmanship, without the gold-plated excess, without turning it into a spectacle. Just quiet, effective competence. That contrast is brutal for Trump's brand because it exposes something Trump has spent his entire life trying to conceal. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. If you want proof that this is what's really going on, look at who Trump attacks most viciously. Not necessarily the strongest adversaries, not always the people defeating him outright. He goes after people who make him feel small. People who possess something he wants but can't buy, intimidate, or bully his way into. Respect, legitimacy, genuine competence. Mark Carney has all of it, and he's not even trying to show it off. That's probably the part that infuriates Trump the most. Carney isn't chasing attention. He's just doing the work. And somehow, that's more threatening than any rival Trump has ever faced. Now let's zoom out, because this isn't just about two personalities colliding. What we're witnessing is a clash between two completely different models of leadership. And what terrifies Trump is that Americans are starting to favor the model he doesn't represent. For years, Trump convinced people that strength looks like dominance. Loud, aggressive, unpredictable, always attacking. That message resonated when people were angry and desperate for disruption. But something has changed. People are tired. They're worn down by the constant chaos. They're exhausted by leaders who turn every disagreement into a personal feud. When they look at Mark Carney, they see an alternative they didn't even realize they were craving: calm authority, thoughtful responses. Someone who absorbs pressure instead of spreading it. That no longer looks like weakness. It looks like strength. And that realization is spreading. You can hear it in the way conservatives talk about Carney. They're not applauding specific policies. They're admiring his demeanor, his steadiness, the fact that he doesn't make everything about himself. Every time someone says that, and it's an unspoken critique of Trump, why can't our leader be like that? The question doesn't have to be voiced. It's already hanging in the air. This is where Trump's fear becomes visible. His entire political identity rests on the idea that his approach is the only approach. That volatility equals strength. That leadership requires spectacle. Mark Carney's success and the respect he's gaining even among American conservatives undermines that belief. And if that belief collapses, what does Trump have left? Here's the most revealing part. Trump can't attack Carney the way he attacks others. He can't label him low energy because Carney's whole appeal is controlled energy. He can't call him dumb because his credentials are unassailable. He can't smear him as corrupt because there's nothing to point to. So what does Trump do instead? He attacks the fact that Americans are listening to him. He attacks the fact that Carney speaks to American audiences at all. And that's the tell. That's Trump exposing his real fear, that Americans might like what they're hearing. This isn't about trade. It's about validation. Trump needs Americans to keep validating his version of leadership. And every time someone looks at Mark Carney and thinks that's what leadership should look like, Trump loses a piece of that validation. And this is why this conflict feels different from all the others. Normally, when Trump picks a fight, there's a strategy. He believes he can win. He believes he can dominate coverage, bend the narrative, make the other person look weak. But with Carney, there's no winning move. If Trump escalates, Carney stays calm, making Trump look unstable. If Trump backs off, he looks weak. If Trump ignores him, Carney keeps building partnerships, earning credibility, and turning Trump's chaos into something to work around instead of something to fear. Trump is trapped. And the harder he struggles, the more he proves Carney's point. That's why this is about fear. Real gut level fear. not fear of losing a vote or a deal. Fear of fading into irrelevance. Fear that the world is moving forward without him. Fear that his model of leadership is being replaced by something he can't outshine. And the most uncomfortable truth is that Trump has good reason to be afraid. Because what we're seeing in real time is a shift in what Americans consider real leadership. The spectacle is losing its hold. Chaos is losing its appeal. People want something steadier, something calmer, something that doesn't drain them every day. Mark Carney didn't set out to challenge Donald Trump. He just kept doing what he's always done, being capable, being measured, being effective. But by refusing to engage in Trump's theater, he became the one thing Trump can't stand: a mirror, showing Americans what they've been missing, showing them that leadership doesn't have to be a performance, that strength doesn't have to shout, that power doesn't have to be chaos. Once people see that reflection, once they recognize what's been absent, Trump's entire brand starts to fracture. That's why he's so obsessed with Carney, not because of tariffs, not because of policy disagreements, but because Mark Carney represents an existential threat to the identity Trump has built for himself. The quiet guy is winning, and Trump knows it. So the next time you see Trump raging about Canada or Mark Carney or some imagined insult, don't dismiss it as just another tantrum. See it for what it really is. Fear. Fear that Americans are starting to ask the question Trump never wanted them to consider. What if strength doesn't look like chaos? What if leadership doesn't require spectacle? What if competence is actually more powerful than performance? Mark Carney isn't trying to answer those questions. He's simply embodying them. And that may be the most threatening thing anyone has ever done to Donald Trump's political career. Because you can't bully someone who won't play your game. You can't dominate someone who refuses to fight on your terms. And you can't perform your way out of being exposed. All that's left is to rage, and hope no one notices that the rage itself is the confession. Stay with me, because this story isn't finished. And what comes next is going to tell us exactly where American leadership is headed.